Welcome to our next in the series of LinkedIn Lives, RecWired. Meet the NEDs, talk about the series. So learning from people who've been there, done it, and can help you as recruiters and owners move the needle. So welcome today, Alison Humphries.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
No, more than welcome. So we were just discussing whilst we were getting our technology sorted. I don't think we've met, and I pride myself on pretty much thinking I know everybody. So do you want to tell? I don't think we have.
Right. Well, I was thinking the exact same thing about you, Andy. I feel like it's extraordinary that over careers in the industry that we would not have crossed each other's paths before. I'll give you a very quick potted history of mine, if that's okay. I started my recruitment career in 1985. Became Hays shortly after I joined it. It wasn't Hays then, and so we were the first recruitment business that Hays had ventured into. Very exciting time. I subsequently became a director there and a director at Robert Half International. I moved into recruitment process outsourcing, completely different world, doing multi-million pound contracts. And I've developed a consultancy career as a board advisor and non-exec director for lots and lots of different recruitment companies over the years. So pleased to be here.
Fantastic. Some of those companies you worked for as well, we very much look in the groups and you can see the DNA of where people have come from. So companies like Hays, Robert Half, great training. They really build their people well.
Pleased you said that, because I was the first head of learning and development at both those companies.
Yeah, and you can actually it's very obvious to us, sort of within the community, those who've sort of, and you can't almost tell by where people have grown up, be it a Robert Half, be it an S3, be it a Michael Page. You can actually just see how people talk, how people feel about business and think about business, and I don't think, but also as well, you can see where people haven't gone through that. Maybe they've worked for a smaller firm or an independent firm, and it's very, very different. It's very noticeable.
Yeah, that is so true. So I'm very glad to have had my foundation in those environments. And obviously, I mean, there wasn't quite so much choice in those days about recruitment businesses, but it gave me something that I think is often very useful for the businesses like the industry, tend to be concentrated around smaller businesses and earlier stage businesses. And I think it's having a model of what a big successful looks like. Now, look, Hays, for example, is more from the one I worked for from 85 to 95. But if you haven't ever experienced, then as a very small new business owner in recruitment, I think sometimes it's quite hard if you haven't got a picture of what you're building to. It's quite hard to understand and sometimes if you've only ever been a recruiter before, build a recruitment business, the infrastructure that is necessary is a bit baffling to you. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. I think those who've sort of worked in big firms are then sort of as you say, conceptualize what a big firm could look like and what it would look like. I think what's also powerful as well is they'll work out what they thought worked and then leave what they didn't as well, because some of the things people sort of grow and it's not always linear growth, and you go backwards, you forward. So I think when you're then setting out, you can look at what you saw work and what you didn't agree with as well. I think. But I think, that sort of scale. I mean, I went to, hadn't been back for 5 years, but I went and saw the new S3 office in London last week. It was really impressive. I thought, wow, this would have been amazing to come and work here. This is how it was now. You're on the 16th floor in the middle of the city, whereas previously I worked in a basement. So it was, but you can actually, as you say, sort of see what this now looks like, or what it did look like, and a vision of what you need to do and a vision of the infrastructure you need to build. So all of these firms were not were probably the result of great leadership, but the great leadership put very good people around them to make, that was the difference in the businesses that scaled and the businesses that didn't.
Yeah. And if you are worked in very small business, sometimes the infrastructure and hiring and the long, hard look at your financials and your marketing and your brand, as well as your, policies and processes, it all seems disproportionate to a lot of people. And it is at first, but if those things get built, then your business is growing on steady foundations. And quite a lot of my work initially, when I start working with a new client, is unfortunately on very, very fragile foundations. Commissions policies that just don't work for the market conditions we're in now, or questionable processes, or a culture that the behaviors that aren't helpful, those kind of things. The strong foundations. But actually, I haven't referred to my early career for a long time now. There are a multitude of brilliant in recruitment I've got lots of high hopes for. And one of the things I love about those is their flexibility and willingness to learn.
100%. You see that, and I absolutely agree with you. When I do advisories, one of the things that you always go in with understanding what they're looking to achieve, but then you then look at where they are, and as you say, it's often things that made sense to them at the time they implemented that probably don't make sense now, or don't make sense. You wouldn't want to keep repeating them. So there's certainly a case sometimes of taking one step backwards to go two steps forwards. And it's difficult sometimes. And I think the key thing you have to do is you have to unpick the emotion behind some of those decisions of why to do it. It doesn't matter why you did it. It's going forward, how would you want to do it? Or if you started tomorrow, how would you do it differently? And I think that's really, really important, that when you do get fresh eyes in and feedback, that you're open to it as well.
Yeah, I guess to sort of simplify it, I guess what it boils down to is having some clarity about what your brand is, and actually having a brand and a strategy that goes with that means there are some things you won't do in the future. And in the early stages, a business owner will typically just be making short-term, more pragmatic decisions, about reward is a good case in point, or about what kind of fee compromises they're prepared to tolerate. And sometimes those decisions have to become a little bit more, well, what are the comps for the future? And so the business owner learns to a longer horizon. At least I would hope so. Yeah.
I think what's interesting for me is when recruiters start their business, they have what's called an away from motivation. So typically they're leaving a salary or they're leaving a contract book. They've got a mortgage, they've got bills to pay, and they just hustle. And recruiters, especially 360 recruiters, are amazing at hustling. And they'll just head down, they'll build their business, they'll build their book, they'll work for 6-12 months flat out, 14 hours a day, they'll get customers, and then come up for air. And guess what? They're probably all right, probably earning more than they were. Everything's getting paid, it's great. But then I think it's a massive issue for them. Now what? They've got there through that sort of sheer inertia. As you say, they've probably done some things they might not have normally done. And I think then it's at that point to, right, you're going to be okay. You've got cash in the bank. Then how are we going to grow this? And I think the other question is, do you want to grow it? I think I've dealt with a whole bunch of recruiters who are living other people's dreams. Some of the recruiters with either just individual business owners with individual businesses or very small businesses have some of like the best lives I know. They've done it for a lifestyle, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what sometimes happens is people get caught between the two stools. Do I want a growth business? Do I want a lifestyle business? And you can have both, but you've got to work out what you're prepared to compromise and not.
Yeah, exactly. And whether you're prepared to put in the work to seriously build a business, because it eats you up for years before it starts to by itself. Recruitment. And I agree with you. I mean, I now am in the fortunate position of running my own business, which is unashamedly a lifestyle business as a consultant, but I still get very heavily involved and down and dirty with my clients. So I do work a lot with implementation of what we're. So
I was with Russell Clements last week, actually, and he was talking about how when he was CEO of S3, he said we didn't get a great use out of the NEDs because they'd tell us, I see like productivity in China's up, it's a good recruitment market. And it's like, this isn't the sort of support we need. We actually need something a bit more relevant than the macro stuff that we could have read in the paper. And so I agree with you. I think as advisors, as NEDs, you have to be prepared to almost walk in the shoes as well. And I think the sort of, you desperately need to do that to help people, because it's a lot of the times as well, it's the only way you can help them is by showing them. And as opposed to being on that sort of high level of, well, wouldn't it be good if we did this? But very much around the instruction.
Yes.
So the topic, I was going to say the topic today is about, and I think it's very, very powerful. It's how you move from contingent to retained. And I think the reason our members, our viewers, and anyone sort of just tuning in for this would be interested in that is that I think just the security it gives you, just in terms of and the ability to plan your business, and but I'm interested in sort of hearing your view on what works, the journeys you've been on with customers to get them to that point, and also what didn't work, and so sort of the things to avoid as well. We are open to questions. If you're on LinkedIn Live, you can send us a question, and at a point we'll answer it. So just I think if you just type in the comments or in the chat, then ask questions to myself or Alison. But so I'm interested. I mean, you're obviously seeing a direction of travel of companies moving towards retained or trying to move to their business towards retained. What's the principal benefits of that, Alison?
Well, yes, that's a great place to start. And it's a lot of my work at the moment, actually, is helping people transition their business from spot perm business, which is, gives them revenue streams like this all over the place, to different sources of reliable recurring revenue forms. Obviously, developing a contract business, one of them. Moving to retain let's call them broadly bundled deals. So whether that takes the form of statement of works or RPO or a call-off type arrangement, all popular methods of trying to smooth the income stream. Because as we know, the majority of recruitment startups start with perm and for the cash flow purposes, and so they don't necessarily make those. I think that's not the only advantage of retainers in business, though. For sanity, I think that well-run retainers actually allow you and your recruiters to schedule their time more effectively. And there's a job satisfaction thing here as well, about knowing that you have been able to provide the best possible trawl of the market for your client, and giving them a really thorough selection process. And that for a lot of people is very rewarding compared to mouth existence of, we know there's a vacancy, let's be the first to get a CV there, which is a lot of people's experience. But you do need to consider that when you commit to a retainer with a client, you are inefficient. You don't check of your time. You are keying to fill their role with someone highly suitable to their business. If you don't know your market very well, that search might take a lot longer than you've planned on. And it may well be that your stakeholder commitment from your client isn't as fully developed as it should be, and therefore they aren't treating you differently from how they would treat you if they were using recruitment. Shall I explain what I mean? Most recruiters who are focused on spot are used to being treated by their clients as one thing, and that is a purveyor of CVs. You and I know, Andy, that most of the people listening here don't just purvey CVs. They inform about the market and salary rates, and they do actually interview for the job. But the spot recruitment client just sees a CV, and then they start the whole qualifying process for themselves very often. They also treat you like a supplier whose success will be based on speed. And I'm slightly demonizing them here, the clients, but that's typically why they will brief 5 people. They just want to. It's very important, if you're going to sell retainers, that you get your client to understand that both of you are going to do something different in this relationship. You, the recruiter, are going to actually carry out a structured process to fill their job, from the market mapping to the competency based, administering psychometrics, whatever it might be. And your client therefore has to commit right from the beginning. Stakeholders and your client have to commit right from the beginning to being crystal clear about what they want, and finally making a decision based on those criteria, rather than something random that they roll in. We forgot to mention the critical characteristic. So let's start again. Do you agree?
So I definitely agree that it becomes more of a partnership with the client. So, and I also think recruiters need to start being paid for their time. It's really important that people value their time, because you talk about briefing 5 people. I'm having my roof fixed at the moment, and if I briefed 5 roofing companies to come in, do it, and I'll pay the one that I thought potentially was going to do the best job. It just doesn't work like that, and I don't think there's many other industries that do that. Work on that sort of basis of, well, if we happen to do this, then we're a free service until the point of we're successful. And I think I agree with your point. I think that's fine if you're in sort of core markets and it's very, very repeatable. If you're doing something that's a little bit off menu, then it's a search, and therefore you should pay for that. And if you go into a restaurant and you have something off menu, you'd expect to pay a different price point for the set lunch. So why wouldn't you do that? I completely agree with you about be it retained, be it contract books, be it subscription services, be it offering RPO. How can you, as a business, and I talk about it, how can you talked about making the income less lumpy, but I think actually, how can you wake up on the first of the month knowing we've got this much committed revenue? If you have a perm only business, you won't, you reset, and on the first of the month, you've obviously got an idea of pipeline, but we all know with pipelines they can happen or they can't, and so how do you do that? And I agree with you. I think it's about reimagining with your customers. How would we do this differently? How can we get the most effect? And it's about selling them the benefits of doing that. Well, you're not going to have 5 roofing companies come in and draw up all your time. You're not going to have to go through these processes. You're not going to have duplication. You're going to have someone who can spend the time really talking about your employee value proposition, getting to know you, as opposed to, I've just got to get to you, as a candidate quickly and send you before someone else does. So I definitely agree. There's a whole, but it's a re-education of the client.
It very much is. And the payment on results only model, if you think about it, because it's a very old model that's become the norm in the recruitment market, which used to be completely separate from the and I'm talking about last century here, but the payment on results only model is, there will always be a market for it for employers who don't necessarily plan their workforce. And what I mean by that is that if I go back to the 1980s, a lot of the recruitment that I was doing for organizations that were generally quite stable. So they only needed to recruit. Somebody left and they were surprised by that. Or they were surprised by their growth, because otherwise they very many of them would be promoting people from within. Or someone went off sick. Yeah, these were distress purchases, quite a large percentage of them. But actually, medium-sized businesses do their workforce planning. They work out their business aims, the budget they've got for them, and what personnel they will need to. And they also appreciate the strategic value of certain people added into their workforce. And once it's not a distress purchase, it's a strategic purchase, the recruitment part, then they would argue that they're paying for a different process. And I would say that actually there's a very good argument for making it more attractive price-wise than the spot business, where if you think about the convenience of Deliveroo, you're paying a little bit extra for your food for that because you didn't plan how you were going to get it. So I do think there's a couple of ways you can come at pricing of retainers, which we're probably going to discuss in a minute. But let me not get ahead of myself. I think my general point is, if it's a distress purchase, then people are looking for speed and pay for it. If it's a strategic purchase, then they're looking for something different.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And distress purchase is interesting because the customer has no commitment until that point. So actually, maybe it's a distress purchase, maybe they're window shopping. And I think that's the other thing that probably is the biggest frustration for recruiters. They feel like they're a free advisory service. They're almost sort of doing a market map for free by providing people to benchmark for people. And at what point does a good pre-sale, showing credibility, showing we can do that, versus actually starting the work, cross over it? And that's why I think it's so important to get a form of commitment. And you've actually got a logical sliding scale of commitment. First off, you've got a commitment that if we find you the right people, we'll interview. You've got a commitment that you've got the exclusive mandate, or you've got a commitment that we're going to pay you up front in a retainer format. So you almost, and the difficulty for recruiters, especially in this market, is that whole sort of where jobs are a bit thinner, they're prepared to work on stuff that they might not have done in a busier market. So how do you work with those customers to make them value their time?
Yeah, well, I think that comes right from the very earliest conversation, doesn't it? Quite apart from knowing their market very well, we'll also use their questioning to get the client to understand the strategic value of the placement or the candidate that they're looking for. Now, obviously, that's easier to do with more senior. You can say, well, you're looking for someone to build out a division that will generate this. Yeah, so it does put our retainer fee into context, doesn't it? Can identify what contracts to the value of X that the successful candidate will be expected to bring in. Then puts our fees into perspective. I think that there's the one is about that is, what is the value of this appointment to you, and what happens if you don't fill it with the best possible person. And the other is about how much, want of a better phrase, how much skin your client wants to put in the game. In other words, if they are committed to what it takes to find this person, and they understand that the process that you're going to go through is complicated, or rather thorough, than a spot recruiter might normally do, then the commitment they make can be actually a really good value price compared to a fee that you agree on the off chance that you might be the successful recruiter in a competitive situation. So, either of those approaches have worked for me over time. And if it's a strategic, then not only are they unlikely to stump up your retainer, deposit, whatever you want to call it, but they are also unlikely to have enough consultation around the profile that you're looking for. Another thing I find with successful retainers, and I did learn this the hard way after the first one I won, was the more important the appointment, the more people are involved in that. And just because somebody's got the biggest, fanciest title does not mean that they can give you a full 360-degree view of what is required in the profile of the candidate. Consequences of that are that you work on the profile that's been described to you by the CEO, let's say, for a new director of sales, and without consulting with the other people on the board that this sales director might have to interact with, who have different expectations of the new. And if you haven't got some more 360 view of what the ideal candidate looks like by having multiple stakeholder consultations, then what's going to happen is that the first time chief finance officer gets involved, they're going to go, absolutely hopeless candidate. I have no idea why that person was put through, not what I would, and you're back at the beginning. A strategically important appointment will always have more than one decision maker involved, in my experience at least.
Yeah, and typically, in a lot of times, you find as a recruiter, you can end up running that process for them and almost being the sort of the person in the middle of that, and being the mediator sometimes as well between that. But also as well, I think as a good recruiter, fully understanding those dynamics and understanding who the stakeholders are, and working with your candidates on a almost on a brief to this is what you're going to need to do, and actually having different potentially different preparations for each of those interviews. But again, I think you can only afford to go into that depth if you are, if the client has some skin in the game, if you've been paid a fee, if you've been paid a shortlist fee to go that extra mile, because otherwise you can be doing all this good work only for them to decide they didn't like, anyone on the shortlist, or for the person they're going to offer to choose, I'm going to move somewhere else, or take a counter offer. So, but you've still done the work.
Yeah, that's very true. Your client is paying you for a process rather than the result here, and that's a weird thing to consider, because the result, it remains very important, of course. But I think where a lot of recruiters I've met have fallen down is when they've tried to move into retained, they haven't actually thought about at all, and we're just going to do the same thing as they did for a spot business, stick out a couple of ads, have a look through the database, and maybe if they're not very busy, they might go and ads on LinkedIn that look relevant and see what they can get. But the aim there is speed, isn't it? If you're going to convince before to pay a retainer, then you really have to be able to explain why that process is as close to fail-proof as it can possibly be. And you have to go on explaining where you've got to in this. There's a long period, isn't there, when you're mapping the market and you're doing initial outreach to people. The client's not going to be very involved in the process at all. They're wondering, what the hell are they doing? Are they just waiting for the ideal season that they can flip it over to? And so I think you have to have clarity about what your process is going to be, and do. I don't think it's going overboard to do a weekly summary. It's only a few lines that says, this week I have spoken to X number of people. I have ruled out Y number of people. These are typically the reasons, and this is the feedback they're giving me about your opportunity. So this is, and these are the actions I'm taking, so that they actually know what they're getting. You know, even a simple diagram of your process with the timelines and who will give some to a client about the thoroughness of the process. In other words, you know, that there's you and your team are doing a considerable amount of research. You might be doing some social media planning around these opportunities. You might be doing a lot of outreach to people in businesses where you know you haven't got them on your database, and all of that takes time, and that is what your clients are actually making the investment.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on, and just to sort of reinforce that point, I think it's all about communications. It's all about showing what it is you're doing, because you know ultimately, as a contingent recruiter, you can take a job spec, you can nail it, and you have the perfect person there within 15-20 minutes, brief, ready to go, perfect CV, interview, deal done. The client doesn't experience anything other than, you know, great, it's successful, but, you know, their feeling is a successful purchase, but that felt very quick. And it's almost like, well, that was easy. And why am I paying 10 grand for that? So I think one of the things that you actually need to show is, like you say, you really show the process. Now, if we actually break down what that probably was, that's probably a recruiter with, you know, working in a niche for 2 to 3 years. You know, they typically know, you know, the people on the market. They know who's available because people come to them because they're the go-to player in the market. And, you know, I remember having a similar thing. My flat got sold off market with the first person that came in about, you know, over asking price. And, you know, I looked at it as, well, why am I paying for this? But also realized that it's the months of work. It's the understanding each buyer and having the relationship with the buyer to say, look, you know, you need to come here. You need to come now. You need to offer them over this, and then you'll get that. So I think, but I think for people who don't understand what a recruiter does, you really have to demonstrate it and really show your process, show your work. It's like maths at school. You couldn't just get the right answer. You had to show your workings to show that you knew how to get there, and you got points for that. So
I like your analogy. I think that really works very well. You've just reminded me, Andy. So quite a few years ago, I was involved as a non-exec with a sales recruiter, and they were doing okay. They were doing was much lower level than I got involved with them and effectively trained them to do search. And those guys went on and made the search process kind of visible. Your listeners will be familiar with ringing bells to anyone. And I came up with that name actually. And so what I think, but the guys take full credit. What they did was they took the search process that I trained them to do, and they made it visible. And the fact that, you know, that platform, you can show it, you can demonstrate it to a client. It's not because it's a brilliant piece of software, kid. No offense, guys. It's because it makes it visible that you've gone into depth with people, and you can therefore use it as a sales tool rather than clients to take on trust, knowledge of the sector, and your thoroughness of process, your brilliance with, you know, moving people on and getting them interested and so on. So visibility, everything, really, really important. And don't expect to just take the money and then do nothing extra for it. I think that leads to disappointment all round, really.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's about taking people on the journey. I mean, I've worked with search firms, and the amount of stuff they actually do, and the attention to detail, like the interviews, it was sensational. But the client never got that, and if they did, the presentation wasn't great. It was, it was like an unformatted Word doc. It's okay. So you've done all of this. It's a high ticket service, and you've actually done a high ticket job. Show it. And it's amazing how people sort of fall down at that sort of last hurdle. And actually, I think one of the things that I see happening is, all the pre-work, all of the interview notes, all of that. Now, I think recruiters will be able to show that a lot easier, because it'll all be transcribed via our AI note takers. We can augment that quicker. We can get it out. But I agree with you on visibility. There's some platforms out there that show you the process. How many people have you spoken to? How many people have you long listed? How many people have you shortlisted? What's the addressable market? And I think recruiters probably forget that for a hiring manager, recruitment is probably 1% of their year, whereas for a recruiter, it's 100% of their career. So they have a lot more knowledge, but they don't demonstrate what they do. And I think the more, without wasting a client's time, the more you can show that we've got this is really important.
I also I'm very open, and I've had some success with moving away from the a third pricing that was always rolled out by the big old search houses.
Aren't they called the Shreks? Isn't it the Shreks, the 4 or 5 big search firms, Heidrick and Korn Ferry and those guys?
Or just Bernstein, and I've never heard that before. It was traditional, and if you were a CEO of a PLC company, frankly, no one would ever blame you for using one of those firms to do your recruitment, even if it didn't end, in the perfect hire. But some what you might call middle layer recruiters who were specialists have done extremely well in moving up to take some of the market off the old-fashioned search firms, many of whom are struggling these days, because the middle market has got very, very, very good and skilled. And those who can't are now eating some of the more old-fashioned and slow search firms who follow their process without any attempt to use better technology, for example, to speed things up. I knew one, it was a former colleague of mine, and she went to work in one of those venerable search firms. And she said, "You won't believe it. I've got a secretary, an assistant, who phones people to make an appointment, interview, and then they phone back and have another conversation with her where they book the appointment. I have the appointment, right?" And this is all in the last 3 years, when we've pretty much all got access to things like Calendly and other booking apps and so forth. And she just said, "You wouldn't believe how slow it is." But she was fortunate in that the legacy of the name of the business she worked, keeping her in. Was keeping her with boards and so forth. I think for the slightly fleeter of foot, middle specialist recruiter who wants to move into this, they should consider flexibility on pricing, and they should consider, speed as well as a factor, because that's what they do really well. And if you can say, "I'm going to, instead of making you wait a month, long list," which again wasn't that uncommon, I'm gonna put my team on this, and we're going to use a load of industry insights that we've got, and we are going to have your long list ready for you by the end of this week. We'll move to shortlist over the course of the next week, and actually that gives us more time for more thorough in for the longer notice period that the successful candidate will need. The other piece is, excuse me, is the pricing, wasn't it? I'm sorry, circling back now. The pricing, I think even a small deposit actually does the job of commitment for you to a great extent.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the balance on completion. And I've always struggled with this. If I think I've created a shortlist, which is usually what triggers the second payment in the traditional model, I think I've created a shortlist and my client turns around and goes, your shortlist is rubbish, Alison, then who's right? What is the definition of a good shortlist? It's hard to say, isn't it, if you're determined to disagree? So that, yeah, the timing of that.
It's a difficult one. So on the one hand, you know, if you're way off base, then it's go again. But to get to that point, you know, you should be, you know, think of it as an iterative process. You know, left a bit, right a bit. You shouldn't get to that point of shortlist and be that far off. So I think both client and recruiter probably take some sort of blame on that. But I think the one thing I would say about pricing, the biggest thing I see in recruitment is the difference between discounting and negotiation. So negotiation, you get something in return, be that commitment, be that, you know, a down payment, be that time, so there's as opposed to discount, we're just going to take some money off and not get anything back. So I would always say that there's a difference between negotiating, pricing, and discounting, and you know, what are we getting back in return, and how much does this effectively add to our chances of winning. I think the other thing increasingly I'm seeing is having that guaranteed business, be it lots of contract roles coming in, be it retainers. You actually don't need your classic search consultants to be doing this. You can build teams around that of resources, be it onshore, offshore. You can do a lot more with technology in terms of at least the sort of, you know, maybe initial screens, those type of things. So for me, I think as well, having that certainty of pipeline enables you as a recruiter not only to do the job better, but probably more efficiently.
Well, after all, if you know you're going to get paid for the work you're doing, it's got to be more efficient than having, and I do see it, I'm afraid, having desperate recruiters who desperately want to avoid doing any new business development. So they just keep working jobs that nobody's interested in, they got, or that aren't paying enough. And it makes them feel busy. That's not efficient in any way, is it?
No, not at all. We're still open for questions. I think you just type it into your LinkedIn on the comments and it comes through to us and we'll do our best to answer. I've noticed one trend though, where I've worked with firms and I've asked them about retainers. They say they don't want to try them because in case they can't deliver. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, it's quite a common first reaction, isn't it, for somebody who's for business end clients who've never tried recruiting someone to run a retainer, and likewise for recruiter, they are worried about their ability to deliver. And I think what they've missed is what we were talking about earlier, understanding that this is a project and it needs to be project managed in a structure so that there is no chance of them not delivering. And I think when recruitment business owners go, oh, I don't know, you know, it all seems a bit risky if I try to sell, they haven't made that mental step yet, because what they're thinking is, oh, basically maybe the right CV won't just happen to fall across my desk. Do you see what I mean? Now maybe that's a little bit harsh, but they haven't what the difference is in the process that they're going to deliver. And well, if we look at the shortlisting stage, I think it would be fair to say that a lot of recruiters could do with brushing up or refreshing their interview technique. But if they don't actually know what they're interviewing for, how can they produce actual justifiable evidence about why that candidate should be on the shortlist, unless they know that the interviewing for are A, B, and C, and the competencies, and they know what standard of evidence the client or the clients in the stakeholder group are looking for against. Now, if they think they're just going to, check down their CV and and basically say, done the management role, let me probe how good a manager they were, then hard to put structured evidence back in front of their client at the shortlisting stage, and that may mean that they don't hit the spot. Because frankly, if you don't know what you're looking for, any or where you're going, any road will do. But it is that highly structured kind of assessment process that is frankly quite new to a lot of recruiters. Even the questioning that goes beyond it, so that when a client goes, "Oh, he's a brilliant communicator." Well, Mr. Client, what do you mean by a brilliant communicator? Because if I put 4 people in a room and ask them to write down what a brilliant communicator does, they'd probably write 4 completely different things. That their emails are always timely and concise. Another might write that they present to people. Another might write great stories, and so on and so forth. So if we can't get our stakeholders, if we haven't got the questioning stakeholders first of all to agree what good looks like, how can we then create a structured process to find that good? So I think there is probably is a bit of a development gap for a lot of people.
I think there's a massive development gap in recent years, because what we've seen is people moving away from being that consultative, how you've described it. I mean, I remember learning how to question. And if you go to recruitment consultant, even with 2 years experience, could they talk about all the types of open, close, assumptive types of questioning that make a real difference? I doubt it. And you get to the point where consultants who I grew up with are the point where they're unconsciously competent about doing it. They just do it naturally. I find myself like closing family to get certainty. So when my folks say I'm going to be up in the afternoon, I'm like, okay, is that likely to be late afternoon, early afternoon? And well, early afternoon. So is that likely to be before 2? And because you need that certainty. Whereas I think people who perhaps haven't done that will let that, oh, great communicator. They've been order takers. So they're happy to take that face value. Whereas, and now I think as well, people are so scared of getting off the phone because they don't want to keep the customer on. They just want to get on and work the job. They don't want to bother them too much. They'll actually miss the detail. And you're absolutely spot on. Good communicator. How could you get that? You evidence it. Can you give me an example of someone you've seen of being a great communicator? Who have you worked with in the past that's been a great communicator, and why? Those questions, I listen into job specs occasionally of consultants. I see it on the group. That level of training just, I think, is absent.
And I know it's unfair to generalize, but I'm afraid I do see a lot of gaps there. The other key skill, and frankly, this isn't just confined to winning retainers. The other, I do think many recruiters I meet could do with working on is what I call downstreaming. So let me term here. Downstreaming is asking beyond the next. So if you actually have secured a retainer, you need a process, right? You have said, okay, I will screen factors A, B, and C. I will in factors D to G. I will use the metric to provide relates to factors H to I. Mr. Client, your responsibility is to sell the business on top of the package created for them, right? So you've got now, it's much easier to downstream if you know the process that your client's going to use in the first place, isn't it? And the days when the interviews are expected to happen and so on. So the downstreaming thing goes, of our listeners, goes, okay, Mr. Potential Candidate, you say you're interested in the job, but you haven't got an up-to-date CV to me. Oh, sometime this week. Well, timelines that we're working to here, I'm going to need tomorrow. Will you be able to do that? What will you do if you get it, you know, or you, okay, so take my details. And by the way, interviews, if you're successful, will be happening on this date and this date. Now, is there any reason why you wouldn't be able to attend on one of those days? And so we're always asking further downstream about their, and that shows not only that we're serious, but it's a commitment test candidate as well, isn't it?
No, I really like that downstreaming. Yeah, that sort of concept of always be closing, but always be showing, you know, signposting the next step. We actually haven't had any questions, so I think we're probably very close to wrapping up. If anyone wants to ask a last-minute question, we're there. But thank you very much for your time, Alison. I think it's been insightful. You're obviously making impact with your customers doing this. If people want to find out more about yourself and your services, how can they get in touch?
Oh, I would suggest you either find me on LinkedIn. Now, Humphries in recruitment. So, in fact, one of them's a client of mine. But I'm Alison Humphries on FREC. That's Honorary Fellow of the REC. You find me that way, or you can just email me, alison@recruitmentleadership.com. Thanks, Andy.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. And I think my takeaway from this is if people are considering or are just doing contingent business, that we focus very much on retainers. They look at how they can make their revenues more smoother and more predictable, and you know, really, I think as well, make sure they get paid for their time. So thank you so much for your time, Alison. It's been great.